as a marketer, you're going to get a lot of people coming. And you can't have an unlimited amount of people. If you're a destination and I said, would you like to have 100 million guests in your city over the weekend? You'd probably say, no, that's too many. So then the next question is, what's the right amount? So I think if we look at it this way, so offense is selling cars, and then defense is putting up parking meters. It's part of the equation. Offense is selling plane tickets, and defense is putting up these little queue ropes that people have to stand in. It's really hard to get those in once the airport is already crowded with people. You need to do this in advance. This is offense, great marketing, but if you get it home and you opened it and it looked like that, you'd want to take it back in and complain that it's a piece of cardboard and it doesn't do anything. The thing is, they're not going to say, oh, we're just a marketing organization, we can't help you. But that's kind of what DMOs are doing. That's their mandate, right? So they'll show this, and then they can provide you with that. And there's nothing stopping them. There's no organization you can go to and complain to about that and say, hey, you promised me that other beach. They provide this online, and they might give you that in reality. I could go on and on all day of places that are not delivering on their brand promise, whether it's the Great Wall of China that looks like that when you get there, or in Norway when you go there for that fjord that you saw online, and you get there and it looks like that. It could go on and on of places that are not delivering. They're out there with national parks having their 100th anniversary in America, and they've done a big IMAX film, and they're presenting it all around the world. There are some fantastic parks in America, which I think many people in the world should go and see someday. But unfortunately, right now, it looks like that. I think that's in Zion National Park. They're overcrowded. Some parks are getting so crowded, people can't even get out of their cars. They get there, they're in a traffic jam for 4 hours, and then they leave the park having never left their car. We journalists are doing stuff like this, right? We're saying it's a great secret. This is what helps sell newspapers, online clicks, all that stuff, right? It's undiscovered, as if there's anything undiscovered in Venice. But we're saying it. It's unspoiled. What's the message? Are you supposed to come and help spoil it? I mean, what are they saying with this kind of language? I don't agree with a lot of my fellow travel writers on this stuff. And here's where it's headed. So the population's grown roughly by this much over the last, 63 years, and international tourism has gone up by that. So if we look at these two trajectories, it looks like this. And you can see by looking at that, we're looking at getting more and more overcrowded in the years to come. These two things are just not even in the same orbit, not even close. So we're going to see almost double as many international travelers just in the next 10 to 12 years. And in some destinations, that could be a multiplier by 5 or 6, depending on how good your marketing is. How is this going to look with twice as many visitors? How is it going to look here in Barcelona with twice as many visitors? It's a scary thought. How is it going to look anywhere, really, like in Amsterdam with twice as many visitors? How are we going to handle that? It's really challenging. And look at this little town in Traverse City, Michigan, which you may have never heard of. So they were welcoming tourists like many other people were, and then suddenly Good Morning America, the morning news program, went in and declared that its little dunes outside of town, which is located about 39 minutes drive, was the most beautiful spot in America. And overnight, they had traffic jams. And suddenly, you saw stuff like this, growing pains in Traverse City. And then you saw this. City council to tourists were just not that into you. In a few years, they went from please come to please don't. And a lot of cities are facing this exact same thing. So what is a good or an authentic amount of tourists? I think it's a good question to ask. I think it should look something sort of like this. Tourism sits as a thin layer on top of what is a normal culture. It doesn't look like that. That is not an authentic experience. In fact, that is the same rough ratio as Disney World in Magic Kingdom in terms of the number of people who work there, the employees to the visitors. That is what it looks like in the gap, right? This is what it looks like. That's how many visitors they get. That's how many locals, and that's the visitors per local. If we look at Venice this way, and they say they get 60,000 visitors, and they have 60,000 locals living in that area, that's 1 visitor per local, right? So I looked at that, and then I looked at some of the pictures, and I thought, you know what? That doesn't look like 1 visitor per local, does it? And neither does that. So I said, something's wrong here. And I said, you know what? Maybe the visitors aren't going everywhere in Venice. In fact, they're really sticking to the main part of Venice. And if we look at the main part of Venice where people go, and we say 60,000 visitors, there's actually only almost 5,000 people who live in that area. And if we do the calculation that way, there are more visitors in that area than Disney World gets. And it does get that comparison to Disney World, and that's why. We've been measuring the wrong thing. And this is the reason that they've probably this summer been standing up to the tourists, especially the cruise lines, and been saying, go away. They even were willing to jump into that nasty water in Venice and put their lives at risk and swim out and form a human blockade to stop the ships from coming in. You got to hate tourism pretty bad to get in that water to start with and put your lives at risk. Amsterdam, same thing. If we take the city center where all the tourists get funneled through, there's that many visitors, and you can see the population density online. We can look at it there. We can do a simple calculation, 7.8 visitors per local in that area. That's more than Disney World. And there's a reason Amsterdam was recently compared to Disney World in the sense of the feel it got. And this isn't just Amsterdam, and it's not Venice. This is going to be the plague of many cities if we're not careful. So what if we attract more sensitive people? That might be one solution, right? What if we go after these kind of hemp clothing wearing, eco-sensitive, lefty tourists? Well, you could put 500 of them into one little town, and it'll still overrun the town. It's a matter of numbers, not how sensitive they are. The sensitivity helps. And a lot of people look at it this way. They're sort of in denial. They say, well, we only get crowded, part of the year. So this is the line in front of Vasa Museum in Stockholm in peak season in the morning. And they could say, and they've said this, they said, our attraction is only overcrowded in the mornings during peak season. And that's true. But you could also say this, 40% of all the visitors throughout the whole year experience it when it's like that. Both of those statements are true. It's a question of how you decide to look at it. So what's the solution to all this? This is a tricky thing. First thing is figure out how many people can your destination hold. That's step one. So typically we have this already, and that's on aircraft lift. And the thing is, when it gets filled on the seats of the airplane, they just add more flights. And we also have it with hotel capacity. Sometimes we can't get into a city because the hotel's occupancy is filled up. But what do? They add more hotels, or Airbnb absorbs it. So we can't count on that because visitors don't come because they enjoy sitting on an airplane or think it's cool to go stay in a hotel. That's typically not why guests are coming to your city, to your destination. They're coming to experience the amazing things that your destination has to offer. But these aren't the things that are deciding capacity. Strange. So here in Dubrovnik, they've finally sort of had enough. It looked like this. They were getting awful reviews on TripAdvisor saying it was overcrowded, and now they've done something about it, just like a month or two ago. They said, we're going to protect it and put carrying capacity crowd limits on entering the old city. That's a huge thing. In the Cinque Terre along Italy, they're now selling tickets. There are now destinations around the world that are taking active steps to fix the problem. And I think this year feels like a turning point in the whole industry of destinations doing something that's difficult to do, that's proactive to make it better, a better experience for the visitors. The other thing is to use time ticketing systems. So if we want to let these great attractions be the thing that determines the capacity, first thing we have to do is maximize them. We want to make sure we're getting as many people through those attractions in a good way. And with time ticketing, so when you book a ticket, you show up at 10 o'clock or 10:30, you go straight in. So not only have you maximized it, but you've eliminated all waiting in your city, if you can do this across the city, if every attraction is doing this. So there's no queuing in your city, and if people aren't queuing, they're going to spend more money, because when they're in a line, they're unhappy, they're tired, and they're out of the consumer loop. So it's a great way to go. And the other thing is, when you have a time ticketing system, you may as well have a good booking system that takes all of those booked spots and puts them out there on an API so that Google and Viator and all the OTAs in China and Expedia can sell those, not just vouchers, but spots in that for those times. It makes a much better availability. And here's how it would look, roughly. And this is sort of the magic of the whole thing of having an API with the whole thing maximized. So let's say you're booking a flight to Stockholm, and you're checking flights, and you're looking on your favorite OTA, and then this pops up. And it says, warning, many of the top attractions are fully booked on these dates. Check availability. And you're like, oh, that's my first time to Stockholm. I might want to see some of these important sites of the city, so I'll check availability. And there it goes. It's full, that one's okay. And then you can click down here. It says, show me the earliest dates when these things have availability. And you can, of course, buy the tickets right there as part of your airplane package. And this is essentially what nice restaurants do. When you call and they're fully booked, they don't say, we'll just put you in another restaurant across the street. They say, we can get you in a month or next week. And this is essentially what they're doing. And what this does, get ready, it spreads out tourism. This is how you get tourism spread out across the dips midweek and into the shoulder season and even into the off season. When people can see, essentially it's just free market stuff, supply and demand. And we can see this with hotels when we're booking, we can see it with airlines when we're booking, but we can't see it with the thing we want to do when we get there. And if we can show that, we will then let this great tail finally wag the dog that it's supposed to be wagging. And I think this is the way to go in terms of letting a free market do it. There are other ways to kind of curb this. You can have visitor passes, you can stop travel or tourism in other ways, and it's certainly worth having that discussion to find the right solution, and there are some other ways. But I think this is the most beautiful because it's simple, it's free market, and you're just letting people decide. Now, if you're going to this city, if you're going to Amsterdam, or you're going to Barcelona, you're going to Rome or to Venice, and you're not going to see these things, you're going to visit family and friends, or you're going for business, you don't care. You can book your ticket, and you're not going to help clog up that part of the city anyway. So it kind of allows everybody to do their thing. It's just adding another layer of transparency. So that's sort of my rough solution. And there is a company that's working on it. I've been speaking with them lately. It's pretty exciting. These guys are actually working on a solution that's very much like I was talking about. You can Google them and reach out to them if you so choose. But I wanted to share sort of a possible solution, and I also want to make sure in my short 15 minutes that I left it up to questions, and I got 1 minute left. So, or 2. Howard, how am I doing on time? Is Howard here? Howard. Sorry, Howard. What did I say? How are we doing on time? Time looking good? Harold. 2 or 3 minutes. We got 2 or 3 minutes for questions. Please follow me on LinkedIn, by the way, if you're not already. And I can barely see. Yes? First world places, yeah. Okay, so how does this work for a Masai Mara or a non-developed country? I want to give an example of a non-developed country. I know this is an issue like in Machu Picchu. Now, one of the things this is going to conjure up in many people's minds, they'll say, you can't be as spontaneous when you travel, you have to book more stuff in advance. That is true with this kind of a operation. But what won't happen, and is currently happening, is people going all the way out to Cusco to visit Machu Picchu with their family coming from London, and they get there and they can't get in. And that's a bigger tragedy in my mind, and that can also happen in a place like Masai Mara. So the first thing to do is to figure out your carrying capacity, and this is something they're trying to come to grips with in Reykjavik on their hiking trails. And it doesn't have to be something that you're charging money for. So a hiking trail could be for free, but you have to book a start time, and you give them a simple UI on their phone. It could go on the honor system, or you could have like a digital check-in, or you could have a ranger there to patrol that. But part of this is just kind of looking around. If you call up any attraction or museum and you ask them, what's the most people you've ever had come through your park or your museum at its peak ever, they'll tell you a number. And you'll ask them, is that a good number? Were people satisfied with that? Would you say that was a good experience? And they'll say, no, it wasn't. And then you say, well, what would be a good number when you wouldn't be afraid to also have the travel media there to cover it? And they'll give you another number. And that's the number you want. And then you can start to use simple tricks and little tools to actually increase that number while still maintaining a great experience. But that's kind of the baseline number that you need to sort of identify and isolate as your carrying capacity. I think we have time for one more, if that's okay, Harold? Is there another one? Yes?
Sorry, just one question. We spent the last probably 30 years trying to mark our environmental impacts in the industry. We do lots of certification stuff. And the reality is that those people not swimming in the lagoon in Venice because somebody wasn't recycling their water. They're in there because of our social impacts. And we need to start measuring those. And I'm just wondering, are there systems out there where small destinations, medium-sized destinations can turn around and say, we can actually start measuring those impacts?
The social impact.
Because they're not swimming in the lagoon because somebody forgot to recycle it.
Well, there's also the environmental impact of some of these cruise ships are bringing with them. But yes, there's the social impact. And I think the simplest way to sum up the social impact is these cities have lost their soul. And we have not put a value on the soul of the city. And there is a significant value there. I mean, look at Paris. This is a city that has no beaches, there's no palm trees, there's no resorts there in the same way. People are coming to experience Parisian life. And if that's suppressed, and you could say that about many of the cities, if that's suppressed, then what's the value? Then you're looking at kind of it's like a dead coral reef. It's architecture, and it's a few croissants. But I think people want more than that. There is a cry out for the authenticity. If you look at the hot destinations like Cuba and Iceland, in fact, Cuba's slogan right now is authentic. How long will they be able to say that if they try to let as many people as possible in the first year or two or three? I mean, I know the Brits are scrambling to get there before the Americans invade. And it's just going to be a race to, steamroller the culture, unless they manage it very carefully. And I hope that'll happen. I think I'm going to end on that hopeful note. And I want to make sure the Herald is able to keep his talks on track on a tricky timeline. Is that okay? Are we doing all right? Yeah. Should we end it there? One more if we want to. All right. Wow. Got lucky. Is there anyone that has one more? I apologize for speaking so fast. It's just tough to get all this information out in a 15-minute period. Yes, in the back. Can you stand up and shout? Wait, any issues in capacity for?
Is there a better way to measure than carrying capacity, or is this the best that we've got?
Okay. Is there any measure that's better than carrying capacity? Well, I think even if you're letting the attractions dictate that carrying capacity, that's not a number that you're defining as the carrying capacity. You're sort of just letting another stakeholder define it. I would say a more important stakeholder in many ways. And there's a new line coming out. I mentioned this yesterday at a talk. I found on LinkedIn, Singapore has one of the only people. It's called Visitor Experience Design. Visitor Experience Design is looking at a bookended experience from when people get off the plane or so until they get back on it and making sure it's all great. So inside the hotel it might be great, inside that nice restaurant it might be great, but if they're waiting, their first 2 hours in the city is waiting in an unair-conditioned customs queue, and that's their last hour as well, that's not good. So we need to make sure that nothing awful happens. And usually the awful thing that happens to most tourists when they're in a city is waiting in long queues, whether it's at customs, it's at a bus stop, it's in an attraction. So it tends to be an overcrowding issue. And it's not usually everywhere. It bottlenecks someplace first. So the right way to attack it is to figure out where the first bottleneck is, and you figure out how to loosen that. And then you go to the next bottleneck, and you loosen that. So you can go one step at a time, or take a full city approach. Thank you. I hope that answers your question a little bit. And thank you so very much for attending. Look forward to speaking with you. If you have any questions after, please come and find me. Thank you.